Welcome to Money Mavericks, the podcast where we explore the dynamic world of finance, investment, and entrepreneurship.
I'm Kirk Drake.
And I'm Darryl Hicks. Together, we're here to bring you the latest insights, expert opinions from the trailblazers who are redefining success in the financial world. All right, well, here we are back again for another episode of the Money Mavericks podcast. Today, Kirk and I are so excited to have Mr. Brian Scott with us. Brian, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Let's hope your excitement is not misplaced.
I definitely know that it is not. But Brian, you've been a titan of industry on the banking side and working obviously currently as the Chief Growth Officer at PSCU. Really exciting news about the merger that happened, the acquisition co-op. I don't know if it's an acquisition or a merger or how we're supposed to do it.
Yep. All of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, you've been around this industry for a really long time, starting even 1993, I believe, at Members Group. Kirk and I would love to kind of hear from where you started and how you end up Chief Growth Officer and on the board at PSCU. So maybe you could talk us through that a bit.
I was a freshman at Drake University thinking I wanted to be an actuary. And from there, I actually got an internship in October of my freshman year at the Members Group. I think at the time I was employee number 29, just a fledgling company. You know, I think at the time we had 80,000 total card accounts that we processed. You know, today at PSCU, we probably have hundreds of credit unions that have more than 80,000 total accounts. So I went from there. I, was involved in the finance area, built a billing and proposal system for the Members Group, and, really decided that I did not want to be in this space. So come my senior year, I had accepted a job to be a tax accountant at Arthur Andersen in Milwaukee. I went from actuary to tax accountant. I'm picking the most exciting careers possible.
Super common. Yeah, we see this all the time, especially for college, college freshmen. I want to be an actuary.
March of my senior year, I was like, hey, I'm going to quit my internship, enjoy, have some parties the last couple months of my senior year. And I already had a job lined up. So turns out the Members Group decided they wanted to keep me, but keep me in sales. Like, I didn't know why. Ended up matching the offer. Instead of going to Arthur Andersen to be a tax accountant, best move I ever made was staying there. So started my career really, truly in, payments, credit cards, debit cards, bill pay, all of that, and kind of worked my way up through the ranks at the Members Group. Fun fact, the Members Group and Co-op Financial Services came together right after I left to go to PSCU. And now PSCU is combining in with Co-op. So in some way, shape, or form, I've been at the same company for 30 plus years now. So not many people, I think, can say that in the marketplace, but that's kind of been my progression. Real quick, when I went to PSU, I went primarily because of Chuck Fagan, who's our CEO, and he called, after he became CEO of PSU and said, hey, we should work together. It's been a great partnership ever since. I've loved every minute of it. So.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of people out there who are maybe new to credit union world and credit union service organizations, CUSOs, as we affectionately refer to them. I know what PSU does. Obviously, Kirk is intimately familiar with it, but maybe you can just kind of run our guests through the quick high level of what PSU does, why they exist in the market, the problem they're solving, who they're solving it for.
So PSU started 45 plus years ago, and the problem was really credit unions individually were too small at the time to issue and process and run credit card and debit card programs. So 5 credit unions got together and said, together, we have enough scale to do this. Individually, we don't. So those 5 credit unions started PSCU along with Dave Serlo, who was the first president, CEO, first employee and only employee for a number of years. And then, grew. A lot of credit unions at the time wanted to be in that space as well. So it provided them a mechanism to do that. So through our history, credit cards, debit cards has been our primary line of business. More lately, we've expanded into other areas that credit unions also need to be in. And, scale in today's day and age is super important. So we kind of provide that scale to the credit union industry. So we have a call center business now where we take 2.5 million phone calls a month. We can answer any question as if you're calling into the credit union. We got into the digital banking space a little bit ago with Lumen Digital. We're in the collection space, so we can collect on any kind of loan. And more recently, we've gotten into money movement with wires, ACH, FedNow, faster payments. So we're connected to over 3,000, both banks and credit unions from that perspective. So a lot of different areas that we're in right now. So
Oh man,
couple
there are
things.
so many jumping off points that I want to get into from this. But Kirk, I'll let you
Yeah.
say jump
I
in there
have a
first.
couple. So one, Serlo he was an NCUA examiner before he started PSCU, right? So that's an
Right,
interesting
yep.
origin story kind of in
Yeah.
that piece. Very regularly do you have the examiner becoming the entrepreneur in that capacity. The other one that's just always interesting to me, which is my grandfather started Data Card.
Oh
And
yeah.
so it's like always fascinating to me to see these kind of derivative pieces of it and see where that kind of goes. I do think it'd probably be helpful since, our aim is to really explore some of the behind the scenes piece. Can you explain issuer versus acquirer, credit union perspective versus the merchant perspective, and the 82 mouths that get fed in between? Just take a couple minutes and kind of explain that piece of it, because I think it's a very complicated piece that most people don't get.
So first, simply, the issuer is the one who issues the card. So bank or credit union is the one who gives their customer or member a card. So they're the issuer. The acquirer is the one who accepts it. So any merchant, Bob's Bike Shop, Best Buy, any merchant who acquires. And then in between, to your point, Kirk, there's a ton of people who have their mouths to be fed. And so I'll just kind of run through those a little bit. So when you swipe your card, somebody runs that merchant terminal that you're swiping or dipping or tapping your card at. They take a little piece of that transaction for providing that service. There's some big players in the middle, Visa, MasterCard, Amex, depending on the brand of card. They get a piece of that transaction, generally pretty big piece of that. There's processors like us that do the processing for the financial institution. And so we take, a few pennies out of that transaction too. And then the issuer of the card, the bank or credit union, they do pretty well on that side from what's called interchange. So let's just take an average $100 transaction. $100, the merchant who actually sells the goods, of that $100, they'll take home about $97.50. So somewhere along the way, they're losing $2.50, and that $2.50 pays pretty much everybody else in that stream. And it compensates them for processing the transaction, eliminating or preventing fraud in that, the cost of issuing the cards. So all of that gets spread out. The issuer, they probably get the most. So they're getting ballpark out of that $2. The other 50 cents is shared by Visa, MasterCard, companies like ours, the acquirer, the ISOs that are along the way.
And the issuer in turn takes a good chunk of that $2 and gives it back to the cardholder in some way, shape, or form, right? Like the big thing that drives the choice to use Visa, MasterCard from a consumer's perspective is that obviously it's extremely convenient. They know that it's a very risk-free transaction because if anything goes wrong, they know they can just call their bank and they can charge it back. There's like a level of protection and being able to overturn fraudulent transactions. There's the prestige, right? Everyone loves like their black card or their gold card, the really heavy metal cards now, right? All private banking, black, platinum, all that stuff. But then a really big driver of it too is points, right? We get these huge rewards that are coming back. And that's a significant amount of that $2 that the issuer is collecting is they're turning right back around into some sort of rewards program for the customers. And then obviously probably the biggest driver of it all is that, especially in a credit scenario, it's allowing people to spend money that they don't have today. There's all these incentives from the cardholder's perspective, and it really starts with them. Like my analogy on this is like if you walk into a Starbucks and there's 100 people in there and you say to them, I've got this really fantastic widget and everybody in there wants to buy it. And you say, I only accept check. How many people are carrying a blank check in their wallet these days? Or same scenario, you say, it's $100 widget. Everybody in the Starbucks wants what you have. And you say, I only accept cash. Right now in 2024, how many people carry $100 in cash
I will
in
tell
their
you at the
wallet?
winery.
I mean, it's an incredibly great point. And I think that gets lost along the way is everybody talks about the merchant. In my example, losing $2.50 of that transaction, but what they gain is far more significant. They get immediate access to those funds. They don't have to manage cash. They don't have to worry about bounce checks. Like there's a lot of benefit along the way. And that whole idea that people can spend money from a credit perspective that they don't have, that is a huge benefit to the merchant too.
Yeah, if you have 1,000 people coming into your website, you want to maximize how many of those 1,000 people are going to end up buying from you. Like I was talking to a buddy of mine the other day who does a massive amount of shipping through his Shopify site, and they just started selling on Amazon, and they discovered that their conversion went up by 400% if they were Amazon Prime certified.
Yeah.
Turns out there's only a very small handful of warehouses that are certified with Amazon Prime in order to get the goods out, and they charge a lot more. But he's like, honestly, at the end of the day, it's a no-brainer for me. I cannot leave those warehouses and 3PLs and logistics, because if I lose that Amazon Prime, he's like, my marketing and advertising costs go through the roof. I love peeling back the layers of the onion saying, why are merchants paying 2.5%? Why, like, none of them are excited about it or happy about it? And why don't we see more like cryptocurrency and some of the other alternative methods of payment? And it's like, well, you got to understand, this is really all driven ultimately by the cardholder. They decide what it is that they want to pay with. And the merchants are like, look, I want the highest possible conversion I can possibly get. And then, like you said, there's other protections they get too, right?
Well, ubiquity is a huge thing too. I've left the house for a week-long trip without cash, anything, without cards, and just use my phone. And that ubiquity is super important to merchants too.
I
That
will say in some of the sketchier places in Southern Oregon, there are some cash-only places still, but it still does occur. It drives me nuts. It's interesting. So we opened the retail side of the winery maybe 6 weeks ago, and I would say 95% of people are a card, which is interesting. The other thing that I think is fascinating, having started C Wallet, and everybody was worried about how Apple Pay and tap on a phone was going to displace everything. And then like the card processors are like, well, we'll just make the card tap. Right. It's like, oh, that turns out that's pretty damn convenient, right?
Yeah, we do say a lot that Visa and MasterCard seem to always find a way to win in the payment space. So
they don't want to be disintermediated. They don't want to be dislodged from the economy. And obviously there's some really deep points of entanglement, even, you know, for AML, anti-money laundering, and know your customer compliance. I mean, they're deeply embedded with the IRS and other elements of the government as well. So there's a lot of free flow of data, that there's a lot of incumbent bias, as we would say.
On Money Mavericks, we don't just talk about making money. We explore the innovative strategies and bold decisions that drive real change. Whether you're an experienced investor, a budding entrepreneur, or just someone looking to make smarter financial choices, we've got something for you.
Every week, we're going to sit down with industry leaders, visionaries, and mavericks who share their journeys, challenges, and breakthroughs, from contrarian views on market trends to the secrets behind building a successful startup. You get an inside look at what it takes to thrive in today's economy.
And we promise to keep it real, engaging, and most importantly, actionable. No jargon, no fluff. Just straightforward conversations that you can apply to your own financial journey.
So get ready to challenge your thinking, expand your knowledge, and take control of your financial future. This is Money Mavericks,
where we turn financial dreams into realities and mavericks into legends.
And part of what gets me fascinated about getting deep into understanding why is it that Visa and MasterCard win so much, for example, right? Why is it that even though merchants hate, or at least they say they hate a lot of times paying this 2.5%, that it still just happens, and it's such a big part of our economy? Because once you start to understand those whys, when you jump over to, like, say, the Fed Now rails and real-time payments, you start to understand, wait a minute, there's some really serious problems. Because you remember, one of the reasons why cardholders like to use their Visa and MasterCard is that they can overturn a transaction if there's fraud. What do we do about fraud in RTP rails? Because if something is real-time transaction, real-time settlement, like the money is gone instantly. Like that, what now, Brian?
I think so. There's a couple things. First of all, it's really important to understand the difference between real time and truly instant. So you use Venmo. It looks like that transaction occurs in real time, but the money technically hasn't moved. It's moving later. And so it's a real time transaction, but that money movement is not instant. In FedNow, the money moves the instant it's gone. And once it's gone, it's gone. If I meant to pay Kirk and I typed in Kirk Drake instead of Kirk, and I paid that person, I'm reliant on their good nature to return the money and not.
I also have that account, just to be clear.
I would have suspected you would, actually. You look at the value of Visa and MasterCard, that network is super valuable. And you see that play out in the US and countries like Australia, where it's deeply penetrated. You go to countries like India, where Visa and MasterCard networks and card usage is super low. When India, as an example, rolled out their version of FedNow, QR codes and that faster payments rails exploded to the point now where it's really hard as a card network, Visa, MasterCard, whoever, to get into India because they built out that network first. And so that first mover building out the network is super important.
Yeah. Incumbent biases are very, very real and run very, very deep in payments. And I mean, look, the two most regulated aspects of Western society are healthcare and financial services, because one's messing with your money and the other's messing with your life. And we need that regulation. We need that protection. But then what happens is that everything moves so flippin' slow, and it's almost impossible for new players to come in, and the existing people become so deeply entrenched. So it's fascinating.
Every time I hear a financial institution, bank or credit union, complain about regulations, I also have to remind them it's a big barrier for entry to a bunch of incumbents. There'd be so many other players in financial services right now if it weren't for those barriers of regulation that banks and credit unions have gotten used to over time. Think of all the fintechs that would be running rampant in financial services without that barrier of regulation.
Although I will say that strangely, the wine regulation and hard liquor or spirits regulation is actually worse than the banking regulation from what I've seen. And the main reason why is at least banking allows for interstate commerce, right? Like liquor and spirits and wine, there's 4 states. If I ship a bottle of wine to, it's a felony. There's no place that if I accidentally pay Kirk instead, that's a felony. Right?
So it's easier to get people drunk on credit than it is on spirits.
It is. It is. It explains a lot of our country. But to be fair, they drink more after they're drunk on the credit.
Okay.
I love these first principle conversations where we're kind of getting into, like, the roots and the history of money, how it moves around, why it moves around, who the players are, why those players exist, what are the benefits, and where is there maybe some regulatory capture where it's not really serving the market as well anymore, some corruption or little other things creep in. But I know that you've got some really deep knowledge on that. What else would you love to share with us on those topics?
So first of all, I think we wouldn't be doing our self-service if we didn't go back, 6,000 plus years ago and really truly look at the origin of money when it started. And you think about 6,000 years old, that's a long time. And really the concept of money has not changed very much in 6,000 years. And so, this idea of going from a true barter economy, I'll trade you a fish for, firewood, whatever. Pretty soon it kind of morphed into people started accumulating fish or firewood as a form of value and a form of money. And so that kind of ended up becoming coins 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And we're using the exact same concept, a store of value that actually has no value. And it's a really interesting concept that it's hard to get your mind around, like, hey, here's something that has no value, but it's going to represent value, a written number on a piece of paper, a check. It's a hard concept to grasp if you put it in those terms, but we've all gotten used to it over time and we all just accept it now. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about too.
There's nothing else in the animal kingdom that will trade an apple for this thing of virtual value. Like if you go to a monkey and you're like, oh, here's an apple or here's $5, like you can't get them to make that leap. It's a uniquely human, construct that actually seems to work. So.
Very uniquely human, and it does work, and it's remarkable that it does work. I mean, you think about checks and, hey, I can write a number on a piece of paper and you're going to be okay with that. And you're going to accept that as value, and other people are going to accept that, hey, somebody else wrote a number on a piece of paper. I think that's just a really interesting concept. So now you get to something where it's bits and bytes and digits, and that's even a more foreign concept. I think to really get to, hey, I'm not even trading you a piece of paper that you could hand to somebody. It's an electronic pulse. And that, I think, really represents where we are today with the state of money.
We've kind of been making this, it's like boiling the frog, right? Really, really slowly. We've been moving bits and pieces. Like for all of us here, like, you know, the Gen Xers who've got like a little bit of gray hair, maybe I've probably got more than you guys, but like I remember when I was a teenager
do.
running around, like everything was really in cash. I got super frustrated when in my newspaper route when I was like 14 years old and they would give me like a check afterwards. And that's what forced me to go and open up a bank account is like, well, I've just given you all this labor and now you've given me this piece of paper. But the only way that I can use that to buy a bike or some bubble gum is if now I go and open up a bank account. So my parents took me down to, you know, our local credit union and I opened up a bank account with the credit union. And next thing you know, I give them this piece of paper and I can go buy bubble gum and I get my first debit card. But still, so much of the economy when I was a teenager ran on cash. And the faster I could turn that check from my newspaper route into cash that I could keep in my pocket, the happier that I was. Now, it's like you just were saying earlier, Brian, you go on a trip for a week long and you might not even bring cards with you because
Right.
you just have it all tied into your phone. We've gone a long way. I like buddies of mine that we walk around. I don't even know, unless you're going to Vegas, I don't know many people that carry cash at all anymore. So we've already made this transition to like, I can log into my online banking and it says that I have XYZ in funds there. And it's really just, you know, pixels on a screen in front of
Yeah.
me. And yet I've gotten so used to the power that that gives me and the ability to move it around. The real leap is when people start going over to like Bitcoin and things like that. Then they're like, okay, well, what's this really backed by? Because at least if I can walk into my bank and I make a mistake and there's something that went wrong or I've been defrauded, there's some sort of arbiter and they're being compensated for that. And you can make arguments as to whether they're being properly compensated and regulatory capture and the incumbent bias and where you get inefficiencies in the market as a result of that. But still, there's this person, this entity that I can go and talk to that I can complain to who's going to have my back and going to back me up. That I think is the bigger leap because getting used to everything just being pixels on a screen and ones and zeros and digital currency, I kind of feel like whether we know it or not, we're there.
We're
So
there.
it's,
Darryl,
100% we are. 100%.
yeah, it's understanding what it really means to have like a permissionless system. That's the leap that I think that people can and should be kind of struggling with when it comes to that. Brian, obviously one of the really big pieces of news for, you know, people like me that are really deep into the payments ecosystem, seeing this really exciting and, you know, earth-shattering news about the merger acquisition, whatever we want to call it, between PSCU and Co-op. I know there's probably some things that you're not really at liberty to disclose because you were pretty deeply involved in that whole transaction at the board level at PSCU, but would love to kind of talk through. I'm sure there's some really amazing lessons for our audience to kind of take away. Mergers and acquisitions is like this thing that people hear about out there, but maybe it just kind of seems a little bit mysterious and often the ether a little bit. But if you could kind of talk us through like why that transaction, why now, some of the gotchas that came along through it, I'd just love to kind of have that unpacked.
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is the fifth time our companies have kind of been down this path, discussing it, talking about it, being on the very precipice of doing it a few times before. So it's certainly not a new idea that our two companies would come together. But the first time we got it done, our CEO says all the time, in the past, there were three letters that got in the way, EGO, ego. And you get the ego out of the way, and that makes everything possible. And this time it was done for all of the right reasons. It was, you have two companies essentially doing the same thing in the credit union space, using credit union funds and essentially for the same things. We're both investing in cybersecurity, digital card issuance solutions, all of those things. And that's using credit union money for the same stuff. And we got together because we can make better use of the funds in the credit union space and help the whole industry grow. Just last week, we had our member forum in San Antonio, and I described it this way. We want to be the rising tide that lifts all the boats. And so you look in the credit union space, CUNA, NAFQ, now America's Credit Unions, they'll come out every year and say, hey, the industry is growing at 3% or 4%. And we all stand around and applaud and, hey, we're growing. That's great. But you look and you take out the top 200, give or take, credit unions out of the entire marketplace of 4,700. Those top 200 represent all of the growth. The bottom 4,500 are essentially flat. And, as a big player in that industry, if we're not helping the industry and the marketplace grow, it's going to impact us. We're not going to be able to grow either. And so we really are doing this for the right reason of, if we come together, we make the best use of the funds that credit unions are giving to us, and we can help the whole industry grow and thrive and survive. Because I think, right now, hundreds of credit unions every year are getting merged away. And a lot of them not for the right reasons like we did, which is, hey, we want to truly help members. A lot of it's, you look at NCUA reports, we couldn't find a new CEO. We didn't have scale to do something. And those aren't necessarily the right reasons. The right reasons are we're doing it for the end good of the end member. And so that was really the focus this time. You can't ignore scale either. You put together PSU and co-op where give or take 16 billion transactions. Chase, Citi, Wells, all of them have way more transactions than we do together. And so it is some reality that we're in a scale business, and the more scale we have, the more influence we have in the marketplace and the industry to bring technologies. Now, all of a sudden, as we're two companies together, there's a lot of fintechs in the last 100 days that have started reaching out, wanting to partner with us and wanting to be able to use us to distribute their technologies into the credit union space. Without our two companies coming together, there aren't as many fintechs that now want to partner with credit unions. So it's truly, we've got to be that rising tide that lifts all boats. And this was one of the ways to accomplish that.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Money Mavericks. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring.
Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to share this episode with someone who needs to hear it.
Stay connected with us on social media and visit our website for exclusive resources, episode transcripts, and more.
Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries, making smart moves, and turning your financial dreams into realities.
You've been listening to Money Mavericks, where Mavericks become legends.